Hi guys, welcome to Multiverse. This is going to be our Justice League video. I hesitated a bit before posting this video. Basically, I made this video quite a few days ago. But some of you guys have been asking what I thought about the film. You seems to really want to know what I think. So here we go. But also, I had posted that video before. I had to remove it because basically I had posted a trailer at the start of the video. I had to remove that trailer, sadly. So later down in the video, I will be referring to a trailer. The trailer I'm talking about is the Justice League trailer we got last January, like in January 2017. So once I start talking about the trailer, if you want to know what I'm talking about, go watch that Justice League 2017 trailer and then come back here. The Justice League trailer is the Come Together Justice League trailer. So just search for the Come Together video and you can't really miss it. So after all that being said, let's get started. There will be plenty of spoilers, so before I get into spoilers, I will just say I'm very sorry, but I did not like the film very much. For everything that I liked in the film, there's 2 or 3 things that I hated about the film. So I wasn't a happy guy after I saw the film. I also saw Thor Ragnarok, which I didn't like either, so it was a pretty bad day for me last Friday. And then on top of that, we found out there would be no Superman Rebirth emblem in the upcoming time capsule. So Friday was a really bad day. So overall, I really didn't like that film. But if you're a big DC fan, you're going to want to see that film no matter what I say. So if you're a DC fan, go see the film. If you're a Batman fan, go see the film. A Wonder Woman fan, go see the film. Again, no matter what I say, if you're a huge DC fan, you're going to want to see the film anyway, or odds are you already saw the film. So what I'm going to say won't really matter if you are a big DC fan. But again, so overall, I didn't like the film very much. It has about 40% rating on RottenTomato.com. I pretty much agree with that rating. I will explain in detail why. But after this point, there will be spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled, if you're a DC fan, go see the film. If you're not a DC fan, you take a chance either way. So from now on, there will be spoilers, so stop listening right now if you don't want to be spoiled. So why did I show the Justice League trailer? It's because basically I didn't have much hope for that film until I saw that trailer. I'm not a fan of Man of Steel. I hated Man of Steel. And afterwards, with BVS, there was a trailer that almost convinced me that BVS could be good. But then we had the infamous Doomsday trailer, which pretty much convinced me that I wouldn't like BVS after all. And even then, after hearing a lot of, well, let's say, negative stuff about the BVS film, I went to see BVS with very low expectations, and at first I thought that people were crazy. At first I thought that the movie would seem to be pretty good, but of course it only was at first. The more the movie went on, and the more the less and less I liked it, until it pretty much it had the same problems that Man of Steel had. And afterwards, I did not even go see Suicide Squad. It was obvious after Man of Steel, after BVS, it was pretty obvious that I was not a fan of the Zack Snyder DC universe, so I didn't see the point of to keep on watching those films. So I did not go see Suicide Squad, and when later on I saw the film on DVD or Blu-ray, I forget, I was really happy that I hadn't seen the film in theater because I pretty much hated that film. So after all that, it was pretty obvious that the Zack Snyder DC universe was not for me, and I guess that's okay. If they really wanted to go for a different audience or a new audience, well, okay, but I wasn't going to be that audience. Although they still managed to convince me to go see Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman did give me a bit of hope. What gave me hope even before Wonder Woman was the trailer I showed at the start of this video. So when I saw that trailer, I thought that, okay, maybe the Justice League film could be a bit better than the rest. Having the whole dynamic with a whole group, maybe that will be better than the dynamic that they tried to have in BVS, where you had Batman and Superman who just wanted to punch each other out for very not very good reasons. And of course, we had all the horror stories about how test screening did horribly, how they decided to reshoot a whole bunch of the film. The rumors are saying that they reshot some people are saying they reshot 20% of the film. Some people are saying they reshot as much as 40% of the film. I would be tempted to believe those who are saying that there's 40% of the film that was reshot because Josh Whedon got credited as a writer for the film. Roughly, in order to have credits as a writer in a motion picture, you must have written at least 30% of the film, or around that amount. So if Josh Whedon wrote at least 30% of the film, it means they reshot at least 30% of the film, and I'd be surprised if they only reshot 30% of the film. So I'm more tempted to believe the rumors that they reshot at least 40% of the film, based on not just on that, but on what we actually saw in the film. Also, there was apparently some directives how they had to cut down about 50 minutes from the film, so that probably didn't help either. And they were still reshooting scenes as early as last summer. Like I think they stopped shooting like in September or something like that. So that was a bit scary. And even the music, basically they changed composer, the music composer in September, I think. So the music was only started really be composed in September. So it was really a rush job to try to meet their release date. So they hired Josh Whedon to reshoot a whole bunch of the film with only about 6 months to do so, and they've hired a new composer to compose the music for the film barely a few months before the film actually was released, which is not unusual. Like it's not like it never happened before, but it's not really the best conditions to try to get the best film possible. But sadly, that explained at least a few of the problems that the film has. Roughly, one of the biggest problems with the film is the visual effects. A lot of the visual effects are not just that they're not very good, they're garbage. That's there's no other words than that. If you look at, let's say, Steppenwolf, holy crap, the character, the model for Steppenwolf was so under rendered that we see video games model that are better rendered than the Steppenwolf we got into the film. Whenever I would see Steppenwolf on screen, it was reminding me of The Rock in the Scorpion King. No, not even Scorpion King. Sorry about that. In the second Mummy film. In the second Mummy film, we have this character called the Scorpion King, played by The Rock, and the 3D model for the Scorpion King was uber under rendered. And the reason for that, it was quite simple. They ran out of time and they ran out of cash to be able to do it properly. So they ended up using not even which like they normally you have multiple rendering passes. But here they before they could actually do the final rendering pass, they had to release the film. So instead of pushing back the film and missing the release dates and finishing the rendering on the Scorpion King, they actually released the film with the unrendered version, if it makes any sense. With a really low resolution version, which is why the Scorpion King in the second Mummy film look that bad. It's not because they couldn't do it. It's just that they ran out of time or they ran out of money and they couldn't do the final rendering before the film came out. So they released the film with a really under-rendered model of the Scorpion King. And here they did pretty much the same. Just as a reference, if you remember the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film, the very sequence at the end where we see a Spider-Man running and jumping and swinging from building to building, and at the very end he ends up where the American flag is, that sequence alone took them 18 months to do and render and all that good stuff. And as soon as they started working on the film, they started working on that sequence right there and then because they needed 18 months to be able to do the whole bit. So imagine now they just, again, as early as this summer, they were reshooting major scenes in Justice League. Well, they didn't have 6 months to do the rendering. They barely had a few months to try and do the rendering. of all the new visual effects they would need. So it's no surprise that Steppenwolf looked so under-rendered. And the same is true with pretty much everything. And they tried to redo all the visual effects. Like if you look at the trailer that I showed in this video, you can clearly see a lot of scenes that were completely changed, and not just that the scenes were changed, like all the scenes in the like sort of Russian village. And you can clearly see in the trailer here that those scenes are dark blue and happening at night. And when you see the very same scenes in the film, it's all orange and red, and basically it's where what's his name, Steppenwolf, again spoiler. It's where Steppenwolf was trying to pretty much terraform the Earth, and he was trying to recreate Apocalypse. So you have all these hues of orange and all that. But holy crap, all of those were not looking very good. None of it looked very convincing. I hadn't seen CGI that bad, I think, since Van Helsing. Basically, Van Helsing, one of the reasons why a lot of the effects in Van Helsing weren't very good is that they had so many of them. They were trying to have so many effects in Van Helsing, and then they didn't have the budget or the time to do all of those effects properly. And the same holds true here. They have so many effects in Justice League, and I'm pretty sure a lot of those they started working on some of those just last summer. So they had nowhere near the time or the money to redo all those effects. It may seem strange to say that they didn't have enough money, but there's only so much that you can actually spend on a film. And from what we know, they've spent a lot of money on that film. I wouldn't be surprised if before long we learned that they spent 300, 400 million dollars on that film. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see, but that film was very, very expensive, and it's heartbreaking to see the result we got from all that money being spent. They spent a lot of money, and a lot of it we don't even see it on screen because they've wasted a lot of that money. And they would have needed a lot more money in order to be able to pull off the effects with the time frame that they had. Basically, there's multiple ways you can do things. One of the ways is that if you start working on FX with a small team, then you're going to need more time to be able to do those effects. So let's say you decide to have a team of only 50 people. Well, those 50 people may need, I don't know, 4 years to be able to do all the effects needed. But if you decide to do the same amount of effects in 2 years, well, then 50 people won't be enough. You're gonna have to hire 100 people, or if you use only your 50 people, well, obviously your visual effects will not be properly completed by the time you're done. You're gonna have to cut corners, and obviously the visual effects will not be as good as they should be. So the solution, if you have less time, is to hire more people, bigger teams, and to have more people to try to produce the work in the short amount of time you have. So let's assume that they had only 6 months to redo a lot of the visual effects. Well, if they kept on doing those visual effects only with the small team they had, or only with whatever team they had originally, well, obviously they're not going to be able to do everything properly. So they're going to have to take a lot of shortcuts, and it will show it, and it showed in the result. In order to have been able to do the work properly, they probably would have had to hire to double or triple their team in order to be able to have enough people to be able to do the work in the short amount of time they had. And it's pretty obvious by now that they didn't do that. They decided to make a lot of changes, a lot of reshoot. They had a lot of visual effects that they had to redo, and if they did increase their visual effects team, it doesn't show, because you can see that what they did was a rush job in terms of visual effects. Even with the music, you can tell that I love Danny Elfman. I'm a big Danny Elfman fan, and overall, I think he did a good job with the soundtrack, the film soundtrack. Sadly, you can painfully see that he didn't have much time to do the work. So he ended up reusing a lot of music that he had done in the past, and that's fine. I'm not against that. I understand that real well, and I understand that it happens more often than not. But still, you can tell that what he did was fine, but it was that's it. It was just fine. Because he ended up reusing a lot of already existing music he had, or whatever new music he created was very similar to music he had already created in the past. So again, you can tell that the visual effects were a rushed last minute job, and the music was pretty much a last minute job. Although the music being a last minute job might have been a good thing, that might be why we got the classic Batman theme from 1989 in the film. We'll never really know for sure, but that might be why they decided to reuse the 1989 Batman film and a lot of music that Danny Elfman produced from the previous Batman films. Although he also reused basically each character had their own theme. Wonder Woman had her theme from the Wonder Woman film or even the BVS film before that. Even Superman at some point had a slight touch of the John Williams theme in the music. I have to admit I can't recall what the theme that Aquaman or Flash had, or if they had any, or the same with Cyborg. And in a lot of places, you could pretty much tell that even though Danny Elfman composed quote unquote a new score for the film, a lot of it sounded a lot like previous scores that he had done in the past. So he seems to have either reused something very similar to things he had done in the past, which in my book is fine. I love Danny Elfman. I love his work. So I was really happy to have a music score by Danny Elfman. So you won't hear me complain about that. But it doesn't change the fact that it's painfully obvious that they didn't have enough time to do a proper job with that film. It's something that sadly happens in movies sometimes. Sometimes they'll decide to make a whole truckload of changes at the very last minute, and they don't seem to realize that doing those changes require time or require money or both. They require time and money. And very often, sadly, they're not willing to put in the money for those changes, but they still ask for those changes though. So anyway, it happens. Let me tell you a story. There's this evil alien that comes to Earth that decides that he's going to terraform the Earth so that his people can come and live on the Earth. Which film am I talking about? Am I talking about Man of Steel? Or am I talking about Justice League? The sad thing is that it's both. They pretty much they reuse the same narrative, the same story, the same plot line as in Batman in Man of Steel. Basically, we have instead of Zod who comes to Earth and wants to turn the Earth into a new Krypton for his people, we have Steppenwolf who comes to Earth. He wants to turn the Earth into a new apocalypse for his people. It's sad, but that's about as deep as it goes in terms of the narrative of the story. And somewhere in there, they fitted the resurrection of Superman, but it's barely a footnote in the film. It's a little heartbreaking how much they've mishandled the characters. That's the worst part about that is that DC or Warner, they have some of the best characters ever created. They have some of the most iconic characters in the world. They have Superman, they have Batman, they have Wonder Woman, and they don't seem to know what to do with them. And it's not just the movies, even in the comics for quite some time now. They don't really seem to know what to do with those characters. It's heartbreaking to see that. And also, there's a lot of sequences in the film, or a lot of bits in the film that we've seen before. And also, we have Josh Whedon contributed to the film quite a lot, it seems. And we can see stuff that he's done in previous, like in Avengers 2, and some of his previous work. He pretty much repeats himself. I'm not sure if I'm not sure again if it was just because of lack of time, or maybe that's just how he's doing this. But same as Danny Elfman, Whedon ended up pretty much repeating himself. He has the gag from Avengers 2. In Avengers 2, you have Bruce Banner who falls face first into the cleavage of Scarlett Johansson. And here we have the same thing. We have the Flash who falls face first into the cleavage of Wonder Woman. Also, the same with You have Hawkeye in Avengers 2 who takes a knee and gives a speech to Scarlet Witch to motivate her to be a hero. And we have the very same scene in Justice League. We have Batman who takes a knee, who coaches Flash in order to turn him into a hero. It was a nice scene, but when I saw that scene, I thought, holy crap, he's repeating the same scene he did in Avengers 2, 2 years before. So I was like, man. And even the opening of the film, like early on in the film, we have this scene of a burglar who's burglaring, and then the evil Batman comes in the dark and start chasing that poor burglar. It pretty much almost a repeat of the some of the early scenes in the Batman 1989 film. Basically, you have the two guys who robbed the people on the street who are splitting the cash, and then Batman comes in and pretty much scare them very good. And the worst part is not that they pretty much repeated the sequence. It's that they didn't even do it half as good as the previous version. That's the worst part. It's something that we often see in remakes. Often they'll try to remake an older film, and you would think that, well, okay, if they're going to remake the film, they're going to remake it and make a better version. And very often, sadly, they don't. Often they make a lesser version of the original film. And here we have pretty much the same. Basically, the Batman uses the burglar to try to catch a parademon, because supposedly the parademons are sensing fear. So he tries to scare the burglar, and once the burglar is scared, he tries to use it as bait so that the parademon will come towards the bait. But holy crap, the burglar was did not even look scared. Like if you look at the Batman from 1989, when Michael Keaton grabs the guy and the guy goes, "Who are you?" and that guy really looked scared. He looked terrified. But in the Justice League, the burglar did not even look terrified. And they tried to add some sweat or something to give the illusion that he maybe should have been terrified, but he wasn't. And they did such a bad job to show that he was terrified that they had to put it in the dialogue. They had to Batman had to explain that, oh, I need you to be afraid, because you couldn't tell from the scene, you could not tell that the guy was really supposed to be afraid, as opposed to if you look at the original scene in the Batman 1989 film. Batman never had to tell to the guy, you have to be afraid. The actor was afraid. He looked afraid. That's how you knew he was afraid, because he was playing the part. Batman didn't need to tell him that he had to be afraid. But here, Batman had to tell the guy, oh yeah, you have to be afraid because I'm looking for parademons. And holy crap. And then, even worse than that is that they establish in that scene that parademon can sense fear. But much later, you have this family of Russian who are hiding in a small house, and they are afraid, they are terrified, and there's like 1 billion parademons around them, and somehow none of the parademons even smelled that. Oh yeah, there's a family over there that's terrified. So they take the time to establish something that doesn't pay off. And not only does it not pay off, but they forget about it later down the line, later in the film. So that first scene with Batman should have been cool, should have been awesome, and it ended up being a lesser version of what they had already done and all the way back in 1989. And then we had Wonder Woman's introduction, which again should have been an awesome scene, but holy crap, again, the visual effects weren't good enough. And even at some point, you had this guy who started shooting at Wonder Woman, and a lot of the action happened off screen, which was disappointing. I understand why, though. Basically, they again, either they run out of money, run out of time, but still, it what should have been an awesome, epic action sequence ended up being disappointing. And the same with the Amazons later on. They have this whole sequence when Steppenwolf goes to Paradise Island, and he goes there for the mother box. And then the Amazons do all those tricks to try to keep the mother box away from Steppenwolf. And again, that should have been an awesome sequence. but their visual effects were so underwhelming that instead of looking at that sequence and thinking, holy crap, that's an awesome sequence, all I could think of was, holy crap, the visual effects are bad. And even Steppenwolf, holy crap, Steppenwolf was bad. And it wasn't any better when Steppenwolf went to Atlantis to get the mother box from Atlantis. And in Atlantis it was even worse because the whole bit in Atlantis, I was wondering like, is this what the Aquaman movie will be like? Because obviously people cannot talk underwater. That's fine. But it seems that they've decided to go the realistic way, quote unquote, and have them not be able to talk underwater. And then yeah, you start wondering how do they talk to each other? They should have tried to think of some workaround so that they could actually talk to each other underwater, whether it's telepathically, I don't care how, but they should have come up with some sort of solutions for the characters to be able to talk to each other underwater. And sadly, the only solution they seems to have thought of is that after the fight is over, Mera create this like bubble of air, and then they can talk to each other. And you have to look at that and ask yourself, holy crap, how inconvenient can that be? It means that whenever they're going to be underwater, unless they create this bubble of air, they're not going to be able to talk in the Aquaman film. Is that telling us that the Aquaman film will happen on land most of the time? Or are they going to spend their time creating these air bubbles so that the characters can talk to each other? Holy crap, that's a scary thought to think about. But even that sequence was strange because of that. Like you had them not be able to talk to each other, and only after the fact could they create this bubble in order to be able to talk to each other. Uh, it wasn't good. Also, we had a sequence with the Flash where the Flash goes to see his father in prison. Sadly, we already saw that scene. We already saw that happen in the Flash TV show. And again, the worst part of all that is that a TV show with barely any budget was able to do a much better job than what should be an Uber production, a blockbuster production with unlimited resources, unlimited cash. And somehow, the little TV show with barely a handful of cash was able to do a better job than the feature film. That's crazy talk, but that happened. We saw it happen live. Basically, they redid something that the TV show did, and again, they redid a lesser version of it. That's the crazy part in all that. You would again the same with the Batman from 1989. You would think that if they redo a scene from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago, from 50 years ago, they would redo the scene better. And sadly, they don't seem to be able to do that. I've seen also a lot of complaint about how the Flash runs. Basically, I'm not sure if it's the actor who cannot run or if they decided to make the choice that Flash would run funny somehow. But basically, I saw a lot of people complain about the way Flash was running, and I have to admit, I cared so little about the character. I disliked this version of the Flash so much that I didn't care how he was running. He could have run any way he wanted. He could have run on his hands, and I just didn't care. So, and maybe in that case, maybe it's just because I am used to the Flash from the TV show, and somehow the Flash from the Justice League film doesn't match with my preconceived notion of what the Flash should be. It could very well be, but I didn't like the Flash very much in the film. It was trying too much to be jokey jokey, which we've seen jokey jokey Flash before. Basically, for a long time, the Flash was actually Wally West as opposed to Barry Allen. So Wally was the jokester of the bunch. He was cracking jokes more often than not. But again, Wally from like 10, 15 years ago was doing a much better cracking jokes than we saw in the Justice League film. In the Justice League film we just saw like 4 days ago. For Aquaman, personally, I'm not a fan of Jason Momoa, but he was fine. He actually did a good job. Whatever's wrong with Aquaman wasn't his fault. As I mentioned, the whole bit about them not being able to communicate underwater, that's a bit strange. But also the whole The way they went about the costumes, the costume for not just Aquaman but for Mera as well. They gave them those bulky armors, which doesn't make any lick of sense. It's always weird because they try to be realistic. They try to make those characters more realistic so that the general audience can accept them better. But somehow they 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 make them so realistic that they give them bulky armors for being underwater. Like it, what kind of sense does that make? They should have given them some sort of wetsuit. That would have made a lot more sense. Or at the very least, some sort of fish scale or stuff like that. You don't give them bulky armor to be underwater. Well, again, they're trying to be realistic, but then they go with that kind of detail. It makes no sense. But that's not Jason Momoa's fault. Again, he did fine with what he had. Uh, he did fine playing the hipster version of Aquaman, I suppose. And for Cyborg, essentially pretty much the first few scenes we have with Cyborg was very reminiscent of the Teen Titan comics when we first saw Cyborg. Basically, you had a bitter Cyborg was bitter because he was an athlete, and then he wasn't an athlete anymore because he was now half machine. So it was strange, and then the exchange he had with his father, it was very reminiscent of Cyborg from the 1980s when the character was created, and the early days of Cyborg when he didn't quite accept the fact that he was no longer human, but he was half man, half machine. So I kind of liked those scenes, but that's as far as it went with Cyborg. He, other than that, the character was pretty forgettable. We saw Lois Lane and Martha Kent, the legendary Martha from the Martha from BVS, and they did fine. They didn't have that many scenes. Their scenes weren't that important, but they had to be there. They had to be there to reestablish that well, Superman is supposed to be in this universe, and also to give them at least a bit of screen time, especially Lois Lane, because she does play a bit of a part a bit later. So you had to show them at least a couple of times for a few key scenes in the film, and they did fine. Diane Lane is a very pretty lady, and she does a really good job. In any film I saw her in, she did a really good job, and Amy Adams as well. They're both really good actresses. So having them in the film cannot be a bad thing, but they didn't have that much to do in the end. And Superman, it's a mixed bag. Sadly, it is still the Superman from Man of Steel or from BVS, but they try to make him more into the classic Superman, into the Superman that I'm pretty sure most people actually wanted to see. The Superman who's actually a good guy, the Superman who worries more about saving people than about punching the bad guys. But sadly, the way they brought him back, it was it was heartbreaking. That's the whole point of that. Watching that film, as the film progresses, my little heart kept on breaking and breaking and breaking because all the poor decisions or bad decisions that were made all throughout the film. So for Superman, in order to bring him back, they pretty much decide to reuse the magic goo that Lex Luthor used to create Doomsday. So basically, they decide to go back into the Kryptonian ship, plunge Superman in the goo, and somehow using the mother box should bring him back to life. We don't really know exactly how. Well, they had a bunch of mumbo jumbo talk that if they put him in the goo and have the mother box touch the goo, and as soon as the mother box touch the goo, if Flash throws in a bit of lightning, that should bring Superman to life. That's pretty much a whole logic behind that. And he does come back to life, but of course at first he's a bit confused, so he fights the League a bit, which was to be expected. It wasn't as much as we thought it would be. Like basically 2 years ago when they killed Superman, we knew that when they would bring him back, Superman would be fighting the League, and then of course he would be chummy chummy with the League right after. That was a given. At the time, we thought they would go in a different direction. Like we thought maybe Darkseid would resurrect a Superman, and then we'll use Superman as his foot soldier or emissary or something. and then that's why Superman would be fighting the Justice League. But here, no, all they did is that he was a bit confused, so he fights the League a bit. And then there's Batman who keeps on saying that he has this big gun to take care of Superman. And it turns out the big gun is Lois Lane. That I suspect that was Josh Whedon being trying to be cute, saying that implying some sort of big gun, and turns out the big gun is only Lois Lane. He did the same thing in Age of Ultron. They kept on talking about the Veronica and Veronica and Veronica. Turns out Veronica was a satellite with the Hulkbuster armor. So anyway, that was Whedon trying to be clever, I'm pretty sure. And personally, I'm not a big fan of Josh Whedon. I don't like when he tries to be too clever for his own good, I think. But I'm pretty much alone in that camp. Although ever since some accusations have been made towards him, even his fans are starting to turn against him. But that's another debate. But personally, I never was a fan of Josh Whedon. So I'm whenever I see him trying to be too clever, I'm not too crazy about that. I wasn't too crazy about Josh Whedon when he was trying to be too clever in Avengers and Avengers 2, and I wasn't too crazy about him being trying to be too clever in Justice League either. So sadly, overall, the whole structure of the story was a bit of a mess. The visual effects were terrible, and but the one thing we did have a few nice action sequences, despite the terrible visual effects. Like, it's heartbreaking to think that they've spent so much money and they ended up with such terrible visual effects. But I can appreciate like a good B movie. I can watch a B movie that has terrible special effects and still enjoy the film for what it is. Sadly, in this case, the B movie with the terrible special effects had like $1 trillion to pay for those effects. And it's heartbreaking to see that they did such a poor job with those visual effects, despite all the money they've spent on that film. It's crazy, but it happens. Like, despite all that, there are quite a few nice action sequences. Like the original sequence with Batman, despite looking a lot like the beginning of the 1989 Batman film, it's still a nice sequence. The way he captures the burglar, but then afterwards he fights one of the parademon, and it ends up being a pretty good action sequence actually. Even later on with the even Wonder Woman, like the visual effects were not very good, but still it should have been a good action sequence. And overall, if you ignore the visual effects, which were let's say incomplete, it actually was good. But sadly, all through the sequence, there are times where you cannot help but wince at how the effects look. And the same with when the League first fight Steppenwolf, or even when Steppenwolf fights the Amazon, like, and the Amazon tried to keep the mother box away from him. It should have been a great action sequence, and overall, it was a great action sequence. But sadly, it was a great action sequence with subpar visual effects. So throughout the whole bit, you're like, wow, that's a nice sequence, but wow, the effects are awful. But wow, that's a nice sequence, but wow, the effects are awful. So you flip flop like that through not just through the action sequences, but pretty much throughout the whole film. And that's why I said for each bit that should have been cool, there was two bits that were pretty terrible. So sadly, whenever something good was happening, it would be followed by a terrible special effect that would make you wince, and sadly, that was not good. And sadly, that pretty much sums up the Justice League film. Something good, followed by something not so good, and sometimes even followed by something terrible. Which is pretty much why I wasn't really planning on making a Justice League video, because I didn't have that much good to say about the film. And pretty much all I really had to say was a pretty long rant about what should have been a great film. That's the heartbreaking part, is that this is the first time we get the Justice League on the big screen, and holy crap, they dropped the ball so badly that it's heartbreaking. They have some of the best characters in the world. They have some of the most iconic and most well-known characters in the world. and they don't know what to do with those characters. All they could think of was to destroy those characters, was to destroy Superman and turn him into someone who would break Zod's neck, as opposed to finding a solution to contain him. It was so heartbreaking. They turned Superman into someone who was so worried, so focused on trying to punch the bad guy, that he wouldn't give a second thought about saving people. And sadly, and they had all the signs to know that this was the wrong direction to go with the character. When Man of Steel was released, right there they knew that people weren't happy with the film, but they made a buttload of money with that film anyway, and they made a buttload of money with the product placement. So that made them think that, hey, let's continue in this direction. And I understand also that there was the Injustice game that was pretty popular. So I can understand that they tried to tap into that well. They tried to think that the Injustice game was popular, or even the Batman Arkham game. They thought, oh, those games are popular. Let's go in that direction. Let's make everything darker, and let's make it more like those things. And it was the wrong call. And after Man of Steel, they should have known that it was the wrong call. But they decided to double down and continue that direction. And even it took Batman v Superman to make them sort of reevaluate their situation a little bit. And even then, they were already in production with Justice League. They tried to make a whole bunch of last-minute changes to Suicide Squad, and we don't know exactly if those change is what turned Suicide Squad into a mess, or was Suicide Squad a mess to begin with. I guess we'll never really know. But basically, they tried to make a whole bunch of changes to Suicide Squad. The result wasn't very good. And then they tried to make a whole bunch of last-minute changes to Justice League, which made it a mess. There's no other words than that. So it's heartbreaking to see them. They have such great characters, such rich characters, and they don't know what to do with those characters. They have no faith in those characters, and all they can think of is to turn those characters into something else, as opposed to just using the characters that they already have. So that is a bit heartbreaking. So anyways, I could go on, but roughly, if you're a big DC Universe fan, you're going to go see the film no matter what I say. So go see the film, but I would strongly suggest lower your expectations. And if you lower your expectations enough, maybe you'll be happy once you come out of seeing the film. Again, as a frame of reference, I didn't like Thor Ragnarok either. It's not as if I liked the new Marvel films and didn't like the DC films. I didn't like either films for different reasons. But in the case of Justice League, the visual effects, again, lower your expectation. Don't expect very good visual effects. Although that's pretty much on par for the course. With Batman v Superman, the fight at the end with Doomsday, that was a pretty bad. The visual effects in that scene, in that sequence, were pretty bad. You could tell that they were trying to do something that they didn't have the time or the resources or the budget for. Even though they had spent a whole bunch of money on BVS, it still wasn't enough to do a convincing job with the final sequence versus Doomsday. And we had the very same problem at the end of Wonder Woman. The fight at the end of Wonder Woman between Wonder Woman and Ares, again, they just could not pull it off. It wasn't even close to being convincing. Visual effects don't have to be realistic. They have to be convincing. They have to make you believe that what you're seeing is actually real, is actually there, as opposed to just a bunch of pixels. And sadly, that's something they're struggling with. Even when they have a huge budget, sometimes they try to overextend themselves. Sometimes they try to do things that they cannot quite pull off with the current technology or the current budget they have. It happens. And BVS, the Justice League film has a lot of that. And for Justice League, we also understand in part why. It's because they redid a whole bunch of the film in just about 6 months, which was crazy. If they had so much reshoot and had to redo so many visual effects, they should have pushed back the film 1 year to properly work on those effects. But even then, even with proper visual effects, maybe people still wouldn't have liked the film. So I guess I can easily understand, I can easily imagine the producers were terrified of spending even more more money on the film that still could be terribly received. So I guess they figured to let it go in that state. They figured Let's let it go in the state that it is right now, as opposed to fix it and make it better. And let's hope people will actually like it. And sadly for them, it has as I'm recording this, it has about 40% on RottenTomatoes.com. It has, I think it's a B plus on Cinema Score. I know that B plus may seem like a good grade. I've seen a few reviewers who are trying to use the B plus as saying that the film was actually good. It's not really. When you look at the number closer, B plus is pretty much what 50 Shades of Grey got. So if you think 50 Shades of Grey was a great film, well, then okay, B plus is a good grade. But sadly, B plus, even though technically it should be a good grade, in reality, not so much. So again, if you're a big DC fan, you're going to go see the film. So go see the film. If you're a Batman fan, a Wonder Woman fan, a Superman fan, go see the film. You might actually like it. But if you're on the fence or if you barely like those characters, I don't think anything in that film is going to be for you. Basically, if you didn't like Batman v Superman or Man of Steel or Suicide Squad, don't see Justice League. It's more of the same. You're not going to like it. They've tried to make it brighter with brighter colors. They've tried to add a bit more jokey jokes here and there, but most of those don't even work. So I wouldn't expect any miracles. If you didn't like the previous films, you're not going to like this one. And sadly, we can't even say it's a surprise. We knew ahead of time that they had a whole bunch of problems during the production. I won't even mention they had a whole bunch of problems during the production. They had a whole bunch of reshoot again, from either 20% or 40% reshoots. And as I told you, I'm pretty sure it's more like 40% of reshoots that they had. So the signs were on the wall, and even more recently, like we had Ben Affleck, who pretty much was saying that he wasn't going to come back as the Batman. We had DC Warner, who tried to hide the film from